When I was 16, I opened my blinds late one night, with the lights off, to someone's face pressed up against my window. This was in the deep suburbs, where we had one streetlight in our cul-de-sac, and it was pitch black outside. I couldn't move or say anything. It was just a pale man's face pressed right into the glass, staring in. It's almost like he wasn't really looking at anything until I opened the blinds. My heart stopped. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. I could hardly see anything. I couldn't even tell if we were making eye contact. My eyes adjusted, and I could finally make out his face. I felt icy needles shoot through my veins, a kind of pain that's hard to describe. His eyes got wide, and he grinned, as though he sensed my fear. I could see the whites of his eyes, 2 feet away from mine. He had very dark lips, and I could barely make out his teeth, locked in the widest grin I've ever seen. He must have been on drugs, because his expression was absolutely insane, and he was not blinking or moving, just locking his eyes to mine. It was sickening. I bolted out of my room to wake my parents, but I took one look back. He was still there, grinning and wide-eyed. We called the cops and huddled in the kitchen with knives. In the pitch-black darkness, we heard nothing. The silence was the worst part. I wish I could hear something, but all I heard was the pounding of my own heart. Even the sound of this predator smashing through the window would have been less terrifying than this eerie silence. The cops came within 10 minutes, although it felt like hours. The cops did a search, and they found the obvious face print on my window. There were also face prints on the other windows surrounding my house, into my parents' room, and into our kitchen. Who knows how long he was out there? There was a small patch of woods behind our backyard. The cops suggested that he probably came through there, and that we should think about putting up a fence. I have never opened the blinds at night since, even after moving away years later, living in a condo on the 20th floor. My wife and I just purchased our first home and had our first child. The house was being built by the builders, and we would drive past the house every so often just to look and see how our house was coming along. We started visiting the house at night and noticed a car parked out front of our house. It was strange, but we figured it was probably just one of the workers leaving their car overnight. Sometimes the car was there, sometimes it wasn't. We didn't think too much of it. Fast forward a few months, and our house is now built. The house is empty, and we are slowly moving everything in during the first week. As for the mysterious car, it started showing up late at night, but not parking directly in front of our house anymore, but about 50 feet away by a nearby park. Now, keep in mind, we are the only house on the block. This was a brand new development, and we were literally the first house built. So we were just this lonesome house in the middle of the desert, a few blocks away from the nearest neighborhood. My wife demands that we buy a security system, and so I do. She spent many nights alone since I had to work the graveyard shift. It's my day off, and I spend it organizing stuff from the moving boxes and hanging out with my 6-month-old son. My wife is at work. I realize that there are no diapers, so I call my mother-in-law and ask her if she could swing by today to drop some off. I tell her that I will leave the front door unlocked because I will be taking a nap with my son. A few hours later, my son is fast asleep on our bed, and I decide to cuddle up with him and go to sleep myself. I lay down when I hear the door chime of my security alarm for the front door. I know it's my mother-in-law, and I really didn't feel like talking to her, so I figured I would just lay there and pretend to be asleep and hope that she wouldn't come upstairs. I hear the footsteps of her coming up the stairs, but she is moving slowly. I thought it was weird, but I figured she knew that we were sleeping and didn't want to wake us up. My back is facing the door to my bedroom, and I hear her open the door. I pretend to be asleep, and I stay still. I hear a quick breath of air, as if she was startled to see us sleeping. No other noise is made, and I assume she is just standing there. I think to myself, okay, you can go away now. But it takes a full minute or two before I hear her slowly tiptoeing out of my room, downstairs, and then out the front door. As soon as I hear the door chime, I pop out of bed and walk downstairs to grab the diapers. But they aren't there. I think to myself, what the hell? She showed up and didn't even leave the diapers? I run over to the front window, and she's gone. During this whole event, my phone was off and charging. So I turn it on to see that I have a new voicemail. It's from my mother-in-law. Sorry, honey. I am not able to come over and bring those diapers. I got caught up in other plans. Have a nice nap. When I was 17, during summer, I was waiting for a friend to come to my house while my family was out of the country. We planned on playing video games all night long. I live in a small city of 7,000 people in France, near Paris, and the houses are far away from each other. I also live in front of a small park that gets very dark and scary at night. There is no one around if you are in trouble. Around 11 p.m., my friend called me on my phone and told me, "Can you open your door? There's someone following me." We don't usually have any problem of violence in our neighborhood, but some young kids do sometimes try to steal your stuff when you're alone in the street. So I ran downstairs to open the door, and I look outside to see my friend walking up my driveway and closing the gate behind him. I open the door, and he comes inside and tells me that someone was following him and telling him, "I'm going to kill you." I watched outside again for 10, 20, 30 seconds, but nothing happened. Suddenly, when the motion light turned off, I saw a huge guy running into my driveway and closing the gate behind him. I looked at the house door just waiting for the guy to try and open it. 2 seconds later, the guy hit the door with force as hard as he could and started to yell, "You're dead, open the door." He kept on slamming against the door again and again. We ran upstairs and locked 2 doors behind us before locking ourselves in my room, where I called the cops. I told them to hurry up. My friend and I were terrified because we didn't know this guy at all. For 5 minutes, the stranger kept on hitting my door, and then total silence. I cannot see the front door from my room, and I was too scared to go look outside. The only thing I could see were the motion lights turning off and on all around the house for about 10 minutes. After that, everything was silent and dark. But I was sure that the guy was still outside. I immediately thought that he had managed to get into the house by breaking a window or something. The police took about 40 minutes to arrive. 40 minutes of terror. We were so relieved when we saw the blue lights stopping in front of my driveway, and yet the creepier thing was still yet to come. There were 5 policemen in total. I yelled from my window, "I don't know where the guy is anymore. He might be in the house. Please do something." 3 of them went to check the backyard, while the other 2 were investigating the front door. 5 minutes later, the 3 guys that went to the back opened the front door from inside and told us to stay locked in because there was a broken window and the guy was probably inside the house. It took them another 10 minutes to find the guy, who was hiding in the bathroom upstairs, in the closet. They arrested him after a brief fight. The guy said he didn't know where he was or why he was there, and he was hiding in the closet because he was scared. I didn't sleep for a week. The person that will forever haunt my slumbering moments I met when I was just out of high school. I didn't have a car, and the concept of public transportation is about as foreign here as the concept of letting strangers off the street into your house and offering them food. So I walked anywhere and everywhere that was within 15 miles. I was working at a fast food restaurant that was about a 45-minute walk from my house and was usually working a 5 p.m. to 1 a.m. shift. I personally loved that shift. It was usually quiet when I got out of work, and I could just walk and think and listen to the sounds of the night. That all changed after I met this person. I was walking home like normal, my uniform shirt thrown over my shoulder, enjoying the feel of the breeze. I saw someone across the street, about 300 yards away in front of me, but all I could see was the silhouette against the front porch light of a house down the road. There are not many streetlights on the back roads in this county, so it's usually very dark and very hard to see at a distance. Something about this guy just seemed off. I thought I saw him holding a knife, but then I thought, it's dark, and my mind is just trying to scare me, so I cautiously took a step forward, reaching into my pocket and gripping my pocket knife. As I get closer to him, I can sort of see his slightly darker shape against the black pine trees behind him. I know I can see a knife at this moment, and my mind clicks that he isn't walking like a normal person. It's almost like he's walking crouched down. I'm not sure what to do. He's between me and my house. The back roads don't connect to each other, and I know the homeless people live in the woods around here. Some of them are okay. Some of them aren't. My brain is screaming at me to do something, but I'm not sure what I should do. So I stand and watch as he gets closer. He gets to within probably 100 feet of me before I hear him saying something. I can't make it out, but I can hear him making some noise. I can also see that he is swinging something around in his other hand. But again, it's dark. It's hard to see. I back off the road a little bit and put the drainage ditch between us, but never take my eyes off the guy. He gets closer, and I see that he does indeed have a rather large knife, and the other object he is swinging around is a dead cat. The warning lights are going off in my head, but I still don't know what to do. I'm just hoping that a car will drive by. He eventually is right across the street from me, and stops. I can hear him really well now. It almost sounded like he was chanting or reciting a verse over and over again. He turned his full body to face me and just roared at me at the top of his lungs. I booked it towards my house, looking over my shoulder every turn, and he was always right behind me. I ran faster than I think I ever have in my life, and he was with me pace for pace, swinging his knife and dead cat every step of the way. I'm not about to lead him to my house though. My mom and sister are home. My dad is out of town for work. I run as fast as I can, passing the road I live on, and as long as I can, but I feel the burn and the pain and the wobble that forecasts my knee giving out. I turn and look over my shoulder, and he's still there, a little bit further away, but still there. I try to make it to a friend's house that I know is home, and most likely still awake. But about 50 feet from his fence, I feel the pop, the grind, and the intense pain as my knee goes out. I fall forward, grabbing my knees and trying to curl into a ball. The pain is intense. I hit the ground with my shoulder and roll. I remember why I was running and look behind me. He was nowhere to be seen. I started crawling towards his fence, getting back on my feet and running as fast as I possibly could. I jumped over the fence before collapsing on the other side again as I landed on my leg. Shouting in pain and crawling across his yard, I start beating on the door before my friend comes to the door, opens it. His very irritated father comes down the stairs. They both stop short when they notice how freaked out I am. I explain what happened, and they both look at me like I'm speaking in tongues. I go through all of it twice for them before my friend agrees to drive me home. I was watching the entire way. I never saw him. We get home, and my friend waits till I'm inside before he leaves. I changed my clothes, got in the shower, and stayed there until the water went cold, trying to wrap my head around everything that just happened. I eventually calmed down and finally lay down to go to sleep around 5 a.m. Something knocks on my window. At first I thought it was just my imagination, and then it happens again, so I'd get out of bed and go to look out the window. He was standing outside my window, smiling. I shouted and woke everyone else up in the house. I called the police, but they didn't show up for at least a half an hour, by which time he was long gone. I couldn't sleep for a month. I stopped walking home from work, and I started carrying more than just a pocket knife if I had to walk alone outside after dark. I still have trouble sleeping at night. I have never seen him again, but I swear sometimes at night when I'm standing outside, I can feel him watching me. I work on a dairy farm, and just the other night I had to clean the milk barn by myself. No one else was on the property, and as I was cleaning, I kept seeing something out of the corner of my eye. It looked like a little white face, about knee-high, and it was just staring at me. I saw the face near the corners in the barn, and whenever I would turn to look, there was nothing there, as if what I saw had ducked around the corner or something. Then, when I went out to open the gate to the corral, I heard someone scream. I remember back when I was in university, I was watching zombie movies late one night. It was about 3 a.m., and I went to get something to drink from the kitchen, and there was this person standing in the middle of the road at the end of the street. They were far enough away that I couldn't make out anything about them, just a shadowy figure. I watched them for about 15 minutes, and they didn't really move, other than some swaying back and forth. I finally decided that my imagination was getting the best of me and decided to watch another movie. After the movie, I went to the kitchen window again, and sure enough, the figure was still there. This time, a car drove by, and the figure began running after it and then stopped. Whoever it was gone when I woke up, but it creeped me out enough that I still remember it 10 years later. When I was about 11 or 12, I rode the school bus with this tall, skinny boy that lived down the street. He was my age and known in the neighborhood as being a very odd kid. On the bus and in school, He would stare at me with these cold, unblinking, wild eyes that sank deep into his pale face. One night, alone in my bedroom, I took off my school clothes and changed into my pajamas. I stood there in front of the mirror, buttoning up my top, and then suddenly got the feeling that I was being watched. And then I saw it. His hungry, wild eyes in the corner of the mirror. I froze, realizing that he had been standing outside my bedroom window in the pitch black night, watching me undress. When I turned around to face the window, he just stood there, staring at me with no expression on his face, motionless, void of life, except for his black, terrifying eyes. I screamed as loud as I could, and he ran away. We continued to go to school together for the next 2 years, and he never stopped staring at me. The image still haunts me, as well as the notion that he walked to my house from over 3 miles away in 20-degree weather in the pitch black night. My husband and I were on a road trip, coming back from Louisiana from Iowa. We would drive in 4-hour shifts while the other person slept in the back. It was about 2 a.m. and he woke me up to start my shift. I looked around and didn't see another car in sight, or even a street light or building. He said that he had taken an alternate route that he thought would be faster. Finally, we come across a small local gas station with a single light on. It was closed, and our car was the only one there. We pull over, and as I'm getting ready to open the door so we can switch places, my husband tells me to hold on. I look up, and from behind the back of the gas station, a man wearing rags was shambling towards us quickly. Not quite running, which made it even scarier. I told my husband to hurry and drive away. He was intrigued. He just stared ahead as the guy got closer and closer. I started freaking out and screaming for him to go until he finally did. As he drove away, I looked behind us until the gas station disappeared. As far as I could see, the man followed the car at the same odd pace he was walking at, until I could no longer see him at all. It still gives me the chills when I think about it. I live in Tennessee, and every year we have a music festival called River Bend on the Tennessee River. The end of the festival is celebrated with one of the best fireworks shows in the world. It is hell to get into, or even close to the festival on the last day. It's like everyone in the southeast United States wants to come see the fireworks. My best friend Tara and I wanted to find a good vantage point that would overlook the river and watch the fireworks. We drove up a ridge near the river and pulled off into a gravel parking lot where we found several other people with the same idea as us. Some trees were in the way, and we noticed a trail that went down the ridge. We walked about 40 yards down the trail and came to a clearing where we could see the river perfectly. We were talking and waiting on the fireworks to start when we started hearing some rustling down the trail. I thought I saw a person's silhouette move between some trees down the ridge. Tara had a small keychain flashlight, and she took it out and shined it down the trail. We didn't see anything. We kept hearing rustling. We finally chalked it up to just a squirrel or something. The fireworks started and had been going on for about a minute when I heard a stick break right next to me. We turned around and looked, but couldn't see anything. Tara turned on her light again, and there was a man standing literally 5 feet away from me. It was so dark that we couldn't see him at all until the light was on him. It was like a horror movie scene. We immediately started heading up the trail, and the whole way he was talking to us, saying things like, "Where are you going? What's your names? What are you two pretty little things doing out here?" We ignored him and kept walking. And then he starts getting angry and saying things like, "You get back here. You know, nobody could hear your screams over the fireworks. I have a knife. You don't even know my name. Nobody would ever catch me if I hurt you." We started running, and we got to the top of the hill where two kids were playing, and I saw their dad standing further back. I told the kids that their dad wanted them, so they would get close to their dad and safe from this creepy guy following us. I then walked over to their dad and asked him if it was okay if we stood with him until the man was gone. He said of course, and thanked us for sending his kids in his direction. The man stood at the beginning of the trail and watched us for a while, and then finally disappeared back into the woods. He had been watching us in the woods for at least 20 minutes before he approached. He waited until the noise of the fireworks began before coming out. This happened in Antioch, California. It was around 2 a.m. I was at a friend's house, safe in warm, sheltered suburbia. We were having a lot to drink, chit-chatting, enjoying ourselves. Of course, when you're having fun, time hits the fast-forward button, and those few minutes turn into an hour. I had too much to drink that night. My friend has a bit of an abrupt bedtime, so I had to dodge out early, still intoxicated. I felt too shameful, thinking I'd be asking too much to stay in his house, to sleep off the drunkenness. I suppose he was either too rude or too drunk to consider it himself. I needed about another hour or so to sober up and drive back. As fast as time passed during my stay, it decided to drastically slow down as soon as I stepped out of his house. It was a cul-de-sac area, a concrete jungle with the stem of the street breaking into a fork. Alongside the road, my car was parked. The only streetlight that worked was in the middle of the cul-de-sac circle, about 80 yards away. I stumbled towards my car, produced my keys, felt the metal lineup, opened my door, and shifted into the back seat. Because this was a dark, strange, and unfamiliar neighborhood, I took the leftover newspapers and a sweater in my back seat to cover myself up. I was a little scared. I wanted to camouflage myself and not just be some guy awkwardly sitting in his car waiting for time to pass. I couldn't fall asleep. The uncomfortable feeling of a cheap back seat bed, enshrouded in darkness, didn't make the chance of slumber any easier. It felt too ominous, and of course, my mind began to wander. I thought of worst-case scenarios, like how the police would shine their lights on me through the window, or a drunk driver hitting my car. Wait. In the distance, about 100 yards away, I could hear footsteps approaching. The gravel scuffed with each step forward, growing in proximity, but periodically taking stops. I wondered why, until it made sense in my mind. Whoever it was probably looking through cars carefully, with the intent to steal one. I couldn't recall how many cars were on the block, but I counted 3 full stops until he was at my window, breathing. I froze. There was no more than 1 foot between us. The car encapsulated me as I lay hidden beneath backseat clutter, forming myself into an object, trying my hardest to be unnoticeable, unmoving, and simply not there. I see you. I didn't want to move or check the window. I remained clutter. My body reacted by minimizing my breathing so much that I felt paralyzed. I dared not to look, my eyes fixated on the back of the passenger seat. I didn't blink. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. My heart was pounding so hard, it shook my body with each throb. He circled around the car. My ears didn't fail me. I heard the steps. I felt like I was part of the car. I could feel him touching the trunk as he carefully pressed down on it, as if to test the alarm, as if to test me. I was in the middle of fight or flight. I couldn't do either without elevating danger. I was frozen and hoping to God he was bluffing. He circled the car again. The door handle to my right jiggled. He was pulling it multiple times. I see you. Same tone, but more agitated and stressed. More convinced that he was trying to make that clutter move, revealing itself to be of his expectations. That it was me. My muscles tense like a cow before slaughter. Tap, tap, tap. That had to be metal against glass. Take a penny right now and tap your window. A crowbar, a knife, a rock, a gun. My eyes fixated on the seat in front of me, never averting my gaze like he was. I was covered enough to where I couldn't see beyond the seat in front of me. I know I couldn't see him, but I could feel his eyes resting on top of me. My mind forced a visual. I already accepted my death. I was ready to be shot in the head, ready to take a life-changing bullet. Multiple knife wounds. Just make this sleep bearable, not excruciating, as you drain me of life. I wouldn't know how to react. My thoughts grew dimmer. I imagined my friend waking up the next morning after a calm night of safe and sound sleep, only to discover my mutilated, defiled, and bloodied body hanging outside my car door. It was then that I heard nothing but my own heart. What was this person doing now? Just staring at me in the middle of the night, talking to me. A messy pile in the back seat. Time froze. The footsteps were being swallowed in the distance. He was walking away. I waited another hour until the sun showed hints of itself. I jumped in my front seat and drove away, wide-eyed and sober. This happened about 1 year ago. To be clear, I live with my mother and father and 2 brothers. My dad is a truck driver, so he is gone constantly. My other brother was visiting his girlfriend in Peru when this all happened. It was just 3 of us in the house. One particular night, around 12 a.m., I was heading to bed. I decided to get a glass of water, so I headed back downstairs. While drinking the water, I decided to look out the tiny window my door had, and I noticed a shadow in my front yard. At first, I thought I was seeing things, but I decided to keep looking. There definitely was someone out there. I wasn't sure what to do, mainly because he was just out there, not moving. He wasn't doing anything. He wasn't trying to break in. I stood there watching him for a good 20 minutes. In those 20 minutes, he didn't move a muscle. And then I noticed another man come out of nowhere. From what I could see, it seemed like they were talking. A minute or 2 goes by, and they both disappear. They moved to the side of my house and jumped my fence to get into my backyard. I freaked out and woke up my mom and brother. I should have woken them up to begin with, but I didn't want to make a big deal out of it if it turned out to be nothing. We called the cops, but at this point in time, there were a couple of car accidents, so they said it would take them 20 to 30 minutes to get to my house. We locked ourselves in my mom's room and waited, hoping they wouldn't come in. While waiting, we heard our garage door open. We started to hear things being thrown around in the garage. They were in there for 15 minutes. The cops finally showed up and arrested both of the men who were still there. It turns out they were both really strung out on drugs. I learned my lesson though. Call the cops immediately if you see something suspicious. You never know what might happen. My boyfriend and our good friend were living in an apartment in our city. To initially get into the large complex, there are security gates that need an access key. Then, another security door to get to the stairwell of ours and our neighbors' apartments. And then the unit doors themselves. There had been a few occasions where I had come home and realized the door to the stairwell was just sitting on the frame without actually closing it, and I would make an effort to close it properly as I came and went. On this night, my boyfriend, my flatmate, and another friend were having drinks at ours on a weeknight, and it was about 11 when our friend who lives up the road left. Like normal, we went to bed. It must have been like 2 in the morning, and I woke up suddenly because I thought I could hear someone treading on our carpet. I remember I audibly gasped because I was confronted by the silhouette of a man standing in our bedroom. I couldn't make him out because my eyes were adjusting to the light, but I immediately thought that it was our flatmate and we might have his car keys or something. It's funny how the brain tries to make sense of a strange situation. To me, the silhouette looked remarkably like our flatmate. I stared at him and he slowly backed out of the room. Then I saw him peer around the door again. I couldn't make out his face, and I said, "Josh, what do you want?" It was the lack of response that scared me the most. My flatmate would have at least explained. He left the doorway, and my heart started pounding, so I elbowed my partner, who woke, and said, "I think there is someone in the house." I was surprised at how quickly he got up, still half asleep. I watched him leave the room, and then really loudly I heard him say, "What the hell? Who are you? Get the hell out of my house." Turns out this guy was waiting in the hallway. I don't think that he was expecting to be confronted by my very large partner. This guy then bolted for the door, which he left on its hinges while saying sorry. I started screaming how close this stranger had been and how vulnerable we were. This happened about 2 months ago. I was living in the house as my parents were away, working for the weekend. They were due back that evening when my mom texted me to say that they had broken down and were waiting for the tow truck to come pick them up. I asked them if there was anything I could do, but they told me to just go to sleep, as they would probably be back late. Fast forward to 3 a.m. I woke up to use the bathroom. When I left the bathroom, I glanced over to their bedroom and the door was shut, but I could see that the light was on inside. At this point, I should note that when I went to sleep, their bedroom door was open and the light was off, so I thought that they must be home. I stumbled towards the door and remember stopping myself, thinking that I shouldn't bother them and I'll just talk to them in the morning. So I turn back towards my room and go back to sleep. The next thing I know, I'm being awoken by the sound of the front door opening downstairs. I glance at the clock, noting that it was 3:45 a.m., 45 minutes after I had woken up last. I thought it was a bit strange, and got a tense feeling in my stomach. I walked out of my bedroom, glanced over to my parents' room, only to see that the door was now open and the light was off. The bed was also made, so no one had been in it. I felt sick. I went downstairs and nervously asked my mom, "Did you guys just get home?" She responded, "Yeah, why?" I just sat staring into space, wondering what the hell just happened. I came home from a date at around 11 p.m. The house was dark. I didn't switch on the lights because I knew my way around. When I came out of the bathroom on my way back to my bedroom, down the hall, I bumped into my dog. He's pretty big, at about mid-thigh. I told my dog that I loved him and that he needs to get back to sleep with me. I open my bedroom door and switch on the light at the same time. I see my dog laying on my bed, lifting his head when the light came on to look at me. What did I just bump into in the hallway? I had a favorite pair of silver hoop earrings that I liked to wear pretty much all the time. One day, I looked for them and couldn't find them. No big deal. I'm kind of disorganized and figured I just left them lying around somewhere. I kept my eyes open for the next day or two, figuring I would stumble across them. But no luck. After they had been missing for a couple days, I had a date planned for later that evening and really wanted to wear them. So I really thoroughly looked everywhere that I could think of. Behind the furniture, under the couch, everywhere. I especially looked in and around my bedroom, as I had a tendency to climb in my bed with them on and feel them poking and pulling when my head would hit the pillow. My usual habit was to sleepily pluck them out and toss them on the nightstand, but sometimes I would miss, so I looked everywhere, behind the nightstand, under the bed, in the sheets, under the pillows. No luck. Bummed out, I gave up. A couple of hours later, I went and got ready for my date. Just as I was about to leave, I glanced at my bed. There, resting in plain sight, on top of my pillow, were my earrings. I was home alone at the time, and hadn't left the house in between looking for the earrings and getting ready for my date. There is no way I could have missed them, and I cannot for the life of me figure out how they got there. I was hiking through the remnants of a remote, long-abandoned town in the surrounding area. To get to as far into the woods as I was, you had to cross fallen trees over a creek 3 times. I had just crossed the 3rd bridge and was about 5 miles in, and something blue caught my eye just ahead of me. There was a man, about in his 60s, wearing blue satin pajamas, sitting in a tree. The closer I got to him, the louder he laughed. It wasn't a maniacal laugh, but it set off all the alarms in my head, nevertheless. He also wasn't wearing any shoes, and looked well-groomed and clean. I gave him a friendly nod as I passed, and he just kept laughing. And then it stopped. I turned, and he was gone. There was no branch cracking, plants rustling, nothing. He was just gone. It still rubs me the wrong way. The area that I was in was a pretty rough hike. It was very secluded. Not very many people venture as deep as I was that day. I have no idea what was going on there. I work the graveyard shift doing security at a facility that has a couple of large warehouses on it. It was Christmas Day, so there were absolutely no other people on the property at all, which was going to mean a super easy night for me. As I was roving around the property, I noticed one of the bay doors was open in one of the warehouses. This was odd for any of the doors to be left open, so I decided to check it out. I walked over to the bay door and walked inside. Now, one thing I must point out is that, in an effort to save money on utilities, all the lights in the warehouse are motion activated and turn on as you walk under them. After you're out of range of the sensor, the lights immediately shut off. So the lights are never on unless you're moving directly underneath them. So as I peered into the warehouses, I looked down one of the aisles of shelves in the warehouse and see a light on in the distance, approximately 300 yards away. Then, the next one comes on, and then the next one. The lights were coming towards me, as if there was someone walking in my direction underneath the lights. Yet there was absolutely nothing down the aisles. After watching the lights move around the facility for a few seconds, I got weirded out and left. I never figured out why it happened, but it creeps me out whenever I think about it. When I was in college, I took a part-time job stocking shelves at Kohl's. We would arrive at 2 a.m. and work until 7 a.m. Each morning we have 5 people arrive like clockwork. We would walk in through the same door and take the far left aisle to get to the back of the store where the employee lounge was located. On this morning, I took the middle aisle because I wanted to bypass the lounge and go to the inventory room to load up my cart. Department stores are creepy when they are not open, especially with 90% of the lights turned off. The floor sometimes has mannequins, half-dressed, and in the aisles because they are constantly shifting product around after closing up the day before. On this morning, I walked down the center aisle and noticed this man walking from the back of the store to the front. He looked to be an older man wearing business clothes. I thought it was odd, but sometimes the regional manager would show up, but it was very early, and this guy was very tall. As we approached one another, I couldn't get a good view of his face. He was wearing really thick eyeglasses that cast a shadow over his mouth and chin, blocking any chance of making eye contact. It was awkward, so when we got within 10 feet of each other, I just looked down and said good morning, giving a quick look, but couldn't really see his face, so I just looked back down. He gave a cheerful good morning response. I continued to the back as he continued to the front. I went into the inventory room and began unboxing items and placing them on the cart. The manager of the morning team came back and started giving me the instructions for the Christmas items. She was very charismatic and always happy. After she finished giving me my items, I asked who was the corporate guy I saw this morning. She gave me this weird look and said nobody was expected today. She asked for a description, and I shared it with her. She felt it could be the new regional marketing guy, but that couldn't be, because he doesn't have keys, and they never come at 2 o'clock in the morning. She darted off to the neighboring admin office to find out if anyone was expected, and I went back to work. 20 minutes later, she comes back saying that indeed, nobody was expected, and the security system showed no entries since closing the night before. She asked if I was messing around, or if I had been drinking. I told her to check the cameras, because I definitely saw someone. She asked if I would go with her to the security room to check the camera feed. I agreed, and we walked to the room. On the way, she was joking, saying, "Let's go see if we can find your new imaginary friend on the cameras." She pulled up the interface for the cameras and set the dial to the hour we arrived, and it started to play the first camera angle. At first we saw nothing. I couldn't remember exactly where we crossed paths, but I thought it was in the area this camera was showing. She asked if I was drunk again. My mind was blown. I really started to question my sanity and saying there is no way that he is not in this camera feed. She pulled up the next camera angle, and this time we saw a shadow figure moving around in the back next to the walls. It was quickly scrambling around, weaving through the clothes racks, with the clothes moving around on their hangers. No visible human being. It just looked like something dark and short, running through the women's section. I went from questioning my sanity to being completely freaked out. We both got the chills, and she stood up to turn the lights on in the room that we were in. We were both in disbelief. After viewing it again, she said, "Let's look at all the angles to make sure that this is real." She clicked the next camera pointed in that direction. It started to play, and we saw a dark shape that resembled a person this time, but it was a person moving around on all fours, really fast and low to the ground, like something you would see in a movie. At this point, the manager picked up the phone to call 911. I told her there is no way the guy I saw was that athletic. He was well into his 50s and about 230 pounds at least. While she was on the phone with 911, she clicked on the next camera angle, which gave us the overhead 360-degree view. I get goosebumps thinking about this again. This angle, you could see the man in clothes finally, but his face is what made our jaws drop. She hung up the phone. I yelled, "Why did you hang up?" I saw her eyes start to water, and she hit the speakerphone option and dialed 911 again. To this day, I still cannot explain that face. It was like he had no mouth. However, with those glasses on and little to no lights made it difficult to confirm what we were actually seeing. We played the next camera at the exact time we arrived, showing toward the front going out of the building. She set it at 10 times forward, and this one showed nobody leaving. Now we have camera angles confirming someone from the back moving to the front of the building, but as it moved past the dressing room, there is a gap in the midsection between cameras. It couldn't be found. I said, "It is still here." She asked me to get on the overhead speaker and ask everyone to come to the lounge. I did so and heard her telling police that we had an intruder or a possible squatter, but didn't feel safe and asked that they hurry. She got on the intercom and repeated my message, but stated it was for a quick meeting. She switched the screen showing the live camera feed to focus on the front entrance to see if anyone would show up or leave. I started to hear everyone coming to the lounge, and we received notification from the 911 operator that 2 officers had arrived and asked that we open the door. Thank goodness the patrolmen were sitting in the parking lot next door. She told the operator that they come to the back of the building because she felt the intruder was still in the middle of the store. We continued to look through the different camera angles until we heard banging on the door next to us, saying, "Police." She jumped up and disarmed it, but couldn't get it to unlock. She realized she was using the wrong key, but finally got it open. 2 officers walk in, and we started telling them everything. They asked for one person to speak at a time and to slow down. After explaining that we believe the person is still in the building, they started to be on alert. One cop said that he would stay with us, and the other volunteered to walk around the floor. The cop that stayed with us asked to see the video. I sat there watching the cop's face instead of the video. I couldn't watch it again. He was disturbed by what he was seeing. He kept saying, "These are not normal moving patterns," and asked if we thought it was a dog. He kept rewinding, and I suggested that he look at the other angles. He got 10 seconds into the other video and grabbed his radio on his shoulder and requested assistance. He specifically requested 5 of the closest patrolmen in the area. He looked at the video system hardware and asked what year it was purchased. She explained it was brand new, and he asked if the brightness could be increased. She brightened it, but it didn't help. And then came the distorted face scene. The cop looked at it and said, "Holy shit, this guy is not human." He started to question the quality of the video. Then I told him I saw this guy this morning, but he looked normal considering it was dark. I explained that we both said good morning, and he was wearing typical business clothes. I shared that his face looked odd because his thick glasses cast a shadow on his mouth. I noticed that he felt relief after I explained, and we continued to go through the footage, and he kept saying this is really, really creepy. This guy went from a demon running on all fours to a casual guy from a distance. He claimed he had never seen anything this bizarre and definitely felt that he was still in the building. Within 5 minutes, the other patrolmen started to show up, and they did a search of the store area. We all stayed in the back watching the cops watch the video. After looking through all the video and searching the floor, nobody was found, and no video showed him leaving. They got out their paperwork and started to interview us. During this time, we viewed all camera angles in fast mode to see if we could see him before we all arrived. We found one instance where a coat fell from the hanger onto the ground, but nothing was near it. No video of anyone except the crew that had closed the night before. The entry system log showed no intrusion or an access request that was made. In the end, they had no idea who it was or what the hell happened. A report was filed and the video was taken. The cops went to the neighboring stores and went through their video feeds, but found nothing. We opened at usual time, and no shelves were stocked beforehand. When I first started working with the medical examiner, I was asked to come in and prepare the autopsy one day. We would typically do our autopsies early in the morning, due to the pathologist's schedule, which meant I had to go in very early in the morning to prepare the body. So here's me, a kid fresh out of college, in the morgue, during the dark of night, like 3 o'clock in the morning, surrounded by bodies, thinking to myself, this is how every horror movie starts. The body that I was preparing for autopsy was a larger person, and I had to move the body from the gurney and the body bag onto the autopsy table myself. I was still pretty new, so I struggled for a while, and as I was pushing the deceased's torso up onto the table, I heard a low wheezing sound escape the deceased's mouth. If I hadn't studied anatomy and physiology, I would have dropped the body, potentially ruining the autopsy, and pissed myself while running out of the morgue. As it stands, I was pretty freaked out, but remembered that air does get into your lungs and stay after you die. Pushing on the body, I had forced some of it out through the trachea. This caused a dead body to moan like a ghost while I was trying to move it around, while alone, in the morgue, with a fridge full of dead people, at 3 o'clock in the morning. Literal graveyard shift, but it was a totally explainable phenomenon. I worked the night shift at an Amazon warehouse. On slow nights, management would send people home, and on this particular night, I was stuck working a very slow night with only 2 other employees in an enormous warehouse where you would hardly see anyone else amongst the 5 floors and hundreds of racks on a normal day. During that shift, I started to catch glimpses of someone wearing red turning the corners as I did. I saw them numerous times. I waited until lunch and checked out what my coworkers were wearing. and neither of them were wearing red. Growing up, I always wanted to go on a bike ride at night. Something about it seemed really cool to me. It wasn't until I was 13 that my mom finally let me. She told me to wear my helmet, have my phone, take a flashlight, and she set the parameters for where I was allowed to go. She gave me about 4 miles, which was a lot to me, so right after the sunset, I was off. I loved it. There were no people out walking their dogs, no kids running around. The temperature was perfect. It was really fun. So fun that I ignored the limits that my mom had set. You see, where I was biking was all walking paths. It was one of those grassy areas between 2 neighborhoods. There's this long path that went at least 600 feet at a 25-degree angle. I was flying down this hill, having an absolute blast, and darted right through the parameters. My mom set these limits for a reason. Everything on the inside was close to houses and people. The outside, more specifically, the place where the path I was on led to, was barren. I rode along this path for 10 minutes before I could only see some of the lights of the houses on the inside of the limits. After 15 minutes of riding along this dirt path, I hear singing. It sounded about 30 or 40 feet in front of me. I stopped riding to hear it better. It was a woman's voice. She was singing Eleanor Rigby by the Beatles, but she wasn't singing the words, just the melody of the vocals. Her voice was strange. You know how when you have phlegm in your throat, your voice gets scratchy? That's what her voice sounded like. I inch forward to try and see her. I get close enough to see the silhouette of hair bouncing up and down. I decide to get my flashlight out. I'm thinking that maybe this person is in need of help or something. Or maybe this is an insane person and the light will scare them away out of my path. So I take the flashlight out of my pocket, point it at her, and turn it on. The moment the light hit her, she stopped moving completely. She was facing away from me. She had disgusting hair that seemed to be sticking together in clumps. Some of her hair was ripped off, too. She was wearing a very oversized, bright red sweater. I was almost too scared to move. I think she was, too. I conjured up as much bravery as I could and said, "Sorry." She didn't respond. I turned the flashlight off and put it back in my pocket. Just as I was turning my bike around, she screams. She screams in an awful, awful high-pitched voice. I damn near shit myself as I throw myself back onto my bike. I hear her voice getting closer to me. I book it as fast as I can. I don't look behind me, and I don't stop pedaling. Her scream grew quieter and quieter until it dissolved into the howling of the wind. One night, at around 1 a.m., I was dead asleep with my ex-boyfriend next to me. All of a sudden, I hear someone in my house asking if anyone was home. I woke up my ex and told him to go see what the hell was going on. We both get out of bed. I can't find my glasses, but the guy is still shouting. I come out of my bedroom in my pajamas and see that there is a big bald guy in what looks like a police uniform standing in the entryway to my house. I'm squinting, trying to get a better look at him, and he looks at me and says, "I just wanted to tell you that your door was left unlocked, and you should lock it." I mumble something to the effect of, "Okay." and he leaves. I'm still as blind as a bat, but I see that he walks away instead of getting into a car. No policeman would be policing the woodsy area I live in on foot. The next day I called the local police station and asked if any officers had reported this incident, and they said they would check with the on-duty officers and get back to me. They called me the next day and said no one had done this. I still get freaked out when I think about this happening, and I wish I knew what that guy was up to. Thinking back about this still seems like something out of a horror movie, and it still makes the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. So me and a girl drive her VW Jetta out to a nature center at about 11 p.m. one night. The gate was never closed after business hours, so we stopped the car in a parking lot overlooking a marsh, a boardwalk which runs through it, and heavy brush. Fleetwood Mac is playing over the stereo, and we are just shooting the shit. 10 to 15 minutes after we park the car, I swear I see a flickering light far off in the brush, but we both shrug it off as we are in the middle of nowhere, and who the hell is going to be roaming around the woods of a closed-down nature center? As you would imagine, it's pretty damn dark in a marsh at night. Once your eyes adjust, you can make out silhouettes and see things directly in front of you, but that's it. Fast forward to 15 minutes later, and we are making out. I'm in the driver's seat, and she's sitting next to me. Both of our seats are sort of reclined back, and I'm leaning over, half on top of her. After a few minutes of making out, I lean up to say something to her, and notice a big dark object pressed up against the passenger side window. At first, it didn't register. And then, like a ton of bricks, it hits me, and I realize that there is a man with his face pressed up against the window watching us. I shoot back like a bolt, staring at the window, and the man has not moved. The girl looks at me and then traces my line of sight to the window and screams. With this, the guy takes off and runs. I turn the car on and put that nature center in the rearview mirror as fast as I could. My cousin and I went out drinking in Ohio. I was drunk, so I step outside for some fresh air from the crowded bar. There was this guy outside who was kind of lanky and having a smoke. Feeling disoriented, I sat on the bench to rest my head a bit, and the guy came up behind me and said, "You're never gonna make it in this world. If I had it my way, I would take you home to my tool shed. I would tie you to the wall and torture you to death." I responded, "Well, that sounds lovely. Hold on, I'm really interested in that, but I've got to take a piss real quick. I'll be right back." I went back into the bar, went into the men's restroom and locked the door until my head cleared up, and then came out and told my cousin that we should leave. My neighbor is an old lady. She comes outside every once in a while to chat with people that walk by her house. The first conversation that she had with my dad, she complimented the painting that he had hanging in his bedroom. No big deal. She probably saw us moving in, or caught a glimpse of it at some point before we got curtains. But then she meets our dog and says, "Well, he's much scarier through the window, isn't he?" Again, no big deal. She comments on things like this often, asking us why we didn't walk our dog that morning. But she's just an old lady, right? She's probably just bored and outside a lot. Then she meets me. She swears she's already met me. but I have never seen her before in my life. She asks me how I like my room and tells me about the girls who had it before me. Weird, but okay. She rubs me the wrong way, but I don't really mind. She's fairly easy to avoid. Or so I thought. As I was taking the dog outside, I happened to glance over and see her staring at me through her window. She lowers the blinds when she sees that I saw her, but is peeking through them watching me. Later, I go to the kitchen to see her again, watching me very intently through the window. Then, upstairs in my parents' room, there's a window in their bathroom. I see her again as I'm replacing the towels. She's just watching me. The more I looked for her, the more I saw. She was watching our house basically all the time. Not only from her window, she sits in her car and watches us from the street. She sits on her porch and watches. She slowly walks down the street and watches us literally all hours of the day. And she does it to her other neighbors, and she did it to the people who lived here before us. Everyone knew to keep your blinds and curtains shut all the time. Otherwise, you can guarantee she watches you. I got up in the middle of the night once to go get something to drink. As I'm standing in my kitchen, I look out my window. It's 4 a.m. and I see a person walking down the sidewalk. He suddenly stops and looks at me, despite me looking through a tiny crack in the curtain. That's the last time that I looked through that window so late at night. I used to work overnights at a hotel and would monitor the security cameras, and a little indicator would blink when motion was detected. It always gave me the creeps when I would hear the elevator ding. I'd run out to the lobby to greet the guest and make sure they didn't need something, and nobody would get off the elevator. I'd watch the tapes and see the motion indicator blinking on a floor. Then I would see the elevator open on that floor and the motion indicator blink on the camera down the hall. It scared the hell out of me. Also, one time I was in my office in the middle of the night, and it sounded like someone banged on the door with the side of their fist. Just one single slam. You can see me reacting to it on the video. My head whipped to face the door where the sound came from. Then, immediately whipped around to stare at the camera to see who the hell was outside my door. There was nobody there, and none of the motion sensors had picked up anything. It was not fun finishing the rest of that shift that night. I had been living with my godparents at the time of this event. It was around 6 p.m., and my godfather gets back from work and asks why there's blood near the pool in the backyard. I had been in the room right next to the pool the whole time, so I had no idea what he was talking about. We pull up the security footage on our security system, and it shows a man jumping the fence in broad daylight, cutting himself with the barbed wire, and looking for ways to get into the house through the back. I was maybe 10 feet away from him and did not hear a thing. It's scary to think what could have happened if a window or the back door was unlocked. I used to sneak out of my house as a teenager to go spend time with my girlfriend, who lived 3 miles away. I would normally ride my bike, but decided against it that night for some reason. After I leave my girlfriend's house, I head home when I see a pair of headlights coming down the road opposite of me. As soon as the car passed me, I could see the surrounding area light up red from their taillights. They were slowing down. The car turned into a side road. I didn't think much of it. Probably someone coming home from a bar or something. About a minute passes, and I see headlights coming from behind me. It was the same car. As it got closer to me, it slowed down. I calmly reached for my pocket knife in case anything happened. I wasn't ready for what I was about to see. The car pulls up beside me. I looked inside, and it was a man dressed as a clown. He smiled at me. Not a friendly smile either. It was a smile that could induce nightmares. A lowered brow, and showing his teeth. I could feel my legs go numb, and I couldn't look away. After about 15 seconds of driving by me at walking speed, he sped off over the hill. A veil of relief fell over me as I thought I was home free. But no, there they were. The same distinct headlights roaring over the hill. I knew it was him as I gripped my blade as hard as I could, preparing to defend myself. He slowed down as he approached me. This time his smiling face was gone. He was dead-faced. What I had thought was some cruel joke quickly erupted to the realization that this clown had something sinister planned. He drove past me and turned into a side road once again, and while he was turning around, I knew I had to act fast. I took off running into the woods, knowing my house was only a mile away. I stayed in the shadows praying I wouldn't be spotted. Thankfully, I got home safely that night. I still wonder what would have happened if I had kept walking on the road. A long time ago, while my family was away on vacation, I was alone, and I had a very bad feeling one night, so I went to go stay at my friend's house down the road. While at his house, around 2 a.m., I ended up receiving several blocked phone calls on my mobile phone. When I answered, the person on the other line did not say anything. I could just hear breathing. A few weeks later, I decided to check my phone bills and discovered the calls came from my home phone. There was an unknown person inside my house. I never did report it, but I don't think I slept much for months after that. Nothing was missing from the house. When I was about 5 or 6 years old, my mom was putting me to bed one night. I fell asleep, and when I woke up in the middle of the night, I saw a dark figure like a man standing in front of the window. I woke up my mom, almost about to cry, and I was hoping it was just a tree or something, because we were on the second floor of the house. But when she woke up, she saw him and told me to stay put and not to move. She quickly ran to the living room because we had guests over and everyone was still awake. She told everyone what happened, and for 3 hours everyone went out and searched around the house. What I didn't tell her was that when she left, the window started to rattle as if someone was trying to open it. I was home alone with my sister. I was 11 and my sister was 14. We had just gotten home from school and we were new to the concept of being home alone. My younger brother had left his bike out on the stoop by our front door, as he always had a tendency to do. I was practicing piano when I heard someone knock on the door. I went downstairs and saw a woman dressed in all black with black sunglasses outside the door. I opened it and she said hello. She told me she was looking for her son and that he might possibly be playing in the neighborhood. I was confused and asked what her son's name was. She insinuated by looking at the bike that her son might be playing with my brother, but would not give his name. I called my sister, who approached the door, and the woman was very deadpan and gloomy. She just kept asking us if we had seen her son. We finally were freaked out enough and slammed the door closed. I ran to a window to see what was happening outside after we had shut the door in her face. The lady stood at the door for about 5 minutes. She did not move. She just stood there silently. She then slowly walked to her car and got in. She backed out of our driveway and onto the street, where she proceeded to sit and idle for some time. I remember frantically not understanding what to do. During this time, my sister and I were panicked. We didn't understand who this woman was or what to do. We were unsure to call 911 because there were 2 daycare houses close to where we lived. We sat and watched her car until we saw our mother's car approaching. When our mother's car pulled in the driveway, her car sped off immediately. Our mom didn't believe us when we told her about the weird encounter. I still remember how deadpan and off-putting the woman was. I don't know what it was all about or what to believe. So I've lived in the British countryside my whole life, so dark woodland and animal noises are nothing new or noteworthy for me. I joined the Scouts too, so many nights were spent playing tracking and stealth games in the woods. I knew the terrain and the area like the back of my hand. However, the campsite was much larger than I had actually known when I was younger. There were some beat-down old signs labeling the borders of the camp to the neighboring moorland and a murky pond full of duckweed. This is also where a toilet block was located, a small wooden shack with showers and stuff inside. The light had been broken as long as I've ever known, so when camping up this end of the site, we used to tie gas lamps to the washing line to light it up at night. For some reason, when going here alone, I always felt strange. When it was loud and busy, I could ignore this feeling. It was most pronounced on one night when I was finished in the bathroom before my friend, but I was waiting for him. We were about 9 or 10 at this point, so of course we didn't want to go alone. But there I was, perched on a tree branch alone for a good 20 minutes. No clue what he was doing in there. The whole time, I didn't feel alone. I felt a strange presence in the trees behind me, which I brushed off as me being paranoid. Eventually, it got too much, and I climbed a little higher up on my tree to get a better view of the woods. What I saw, what I could swear, were eyes. However, they weren't that of a cat, badger, or any other animal I recognized. They looked almost human. They stared back at me for a good few seconds while I held my breath, trying to melt back into the tree until a loud bang was heard, startling me, and so I looked back to see my friend was finished. I quickly looked back where the eyes had been to see nothing, and so I hurried back with my friend to our camp, and nothing else strange happened for the rest of that weekend. So there's a reason I mentioned earlier that the grounds were bigger than I had known then. I always felt a little uneasy in that one end of the woods, like I was being watched, and there was nothing past that toilet block on our crude printout maps. However, there was a much larger tapestry map in the base room, which I had never paid much attention to. Since the weird eyes incident, I tended to avoid using that block at all. Sometimes even bothering to walk a whole mile to the fancy, clean ones near base in the middle of the night. When I was 12, I remember making my way back from the nicer toilet block. I was daydreaming a little, as it would take me a while to get back to camp, and so wasn't fully paying attention to my surroundings. I suddenly heard a faint crunching of leaves right behind me. Too heavy and uncoordinated to be any animal, I whipped around and punched it. So of course, I was very shaken up, and while running entirely on adrenaline, I didn't get a decent look at the thing. I just punched and smacked it like only a terrified preteen girl could, while stumbling backwards to get away when something pulled up beside me. I looked back to see my scout leader had pulled up in his quad bike. He'd been looking for me since the other girls had said how long I'd been, as I had the extra walk by avoiding the creepy bathroom. So I was safe. He gave me a lift back to camp, but I still have nightmares about what might have happened to me if he hadn't come when he did. Nothing else happened since that incident until I was 15. Our gas lamps were running out, so we only had one very dim light left, just enough to light up the sink's area. The nicer toilet block wasn't an option this time, as another group were camping near there, and I would feel awkward as heck just waltzing into someone else's camp. As I went to open the door to the cubicle, I felt a slight vibration through the wood, and as the door swung open, I saw a pale, humanoid figure slide out of sight. I kinda just turned and walked out, not really sure how to react. Needless to say, I pissed in the woods that night.
I live in Denmark, at the edge of one of our larger cities. The apartments here are for students only, and a lot of people live close together in this area. However, you don't see a lot of people except for in the student bar after midnight. A friend of mine lives here as well, just on the other side of the parking lot, next to which there is a small playground. This friend and I enjoy watching horror movies, and that's what we were doing on the evening that I'm describing. I was at his place. We had been watching movies all night and it was getting quite late. I think it was around 3 a.m., and I was going to go home to go to bed. I've never been too comfortable in darkness, and watching horror movies doesn't necessarily help. Furthermore, for some reason there's often some issues with some of the lampposts outside here, so some areas will be completely unlit. I'm walking home at around 3 a.m. and naturally the light is out in the parking lot, as well as the playground area. Not a problem? I'm not particularly excited about it, but I'm not uncomfortable crossing the lot either. I'm halfway across when I hear a squeaking sound from the playground. I turn to examine the origin, and on the playground, on one of the swings is what appears to be a little girl. I could tell she had long hair, but it was very dark, and she was swinging eerily back and forth, completely in the dark, alone. I went straight home and called up my friend whose place I'd just left on Skype, and told him about it. He has a window overlooking the playground, and was of course intrigued, so he left the computer for a second to have a look outside. He returned half a minute later to inform me that the playground was completely deserted.